Welcome to Back to My Garden. Discover your passion for gardening. Here's Dave Ledoux.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world when you listen to this. I'm Dave Ledoux, and welcome to another episode of Back to My Garden. Tremendous episode today, folks. Ruth loves the way her conservatory garden lifts her spirits during the cold winter months. She is a celebrated author of 10 books for both kids and grown-ups on science, history, and gardening. Ruth's brand new book is called A Garden of Marvels and explores the untold history of the first botanists and extraordinary plants. We have a lot to discuss. We're never going to fit it into one episode, but we'll do our best. Please welcome from the East Coast of the United States under very cold temperatures, Ruth Kassinger. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Thank you for braving the winter months, and we have listeners from all over the world who don't know what snow is, so maybe we'll touch on four-season gardening, but welcome to the show. I give you a little brief introduction. I want to hear your stories, and our listeners want to know you better. Can you take a minute or two and just tell us a little bit about your background and how did you discover gardening?
Well, I am, as you mentioned, I've written 10 books on science and the history of science. But about 5 years ago, I became interested in indoor gardening. And that was quite a departure for me. My husband is the real gardener in the family, and he travels quite a bit. And when he traveled, he would ask me at least to go out and pick the vegetables out of his small backyard vegetable garden. And to me, gardening was a chore. I didn't like being out in the heat of the East Coast summers. It's very hot and humid. I live near Washington, D.C., and there are mosquitoes and humidity and little creepy crawly things that would sneak up my legs, and I was not a gardener. And even doing the harvesting, I would find myself reaching down to pull out a zucchini off of a vine and discover that I was too late and my fingers sank into the underside. So it was kind of a family joke that Ruth was not a gardener. But when I was about 40, I'd had a couple of bad things happen to me. My younger sister had recently passed away. She'd had a brain tumor. And then shortly after that, I discovered that I had breast cancer. And all turned out well on that, but, it was not a cheery, optimistic time in my life. I was doing some consulting work on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and coming home one gray, dreary January evening, and about to catch the metro, which is our subway here, and as I walked to the metro, I went by the United States Botanic Garden, and the Botanic Garden has a very large glass conservatory. I hadn't been in it in quite some time, especially since it had been closed for about 4 years for renovations. And as I was going home, I thought, let me just poke my head in there because I saw a sign that said that it was now open. And it was about 4:30, and the sign said that the building would close at 5. But in any case, I walked in, and these wonderful glass doors swooshed open, and I walked into this marvelous green, jungle-like atmosphere. It was warm, and the air was moist at a time when it was freezing cold outside. And I spent a fantastic half hour there, and the conservatory just stayed on my mind. And I thought about it and decided that this place lifted my spirits so much that I wanted to have a home conservatory. And that was the beginning of this adventure of building a conservatory, which is the story of, I wrote the story in my first book for adults called Paradise Under Glass. And that was the beginning. I did feel like I needed to test my ability to grow plants because I'd been so garden averse. But I thought, this is indoor gardening. I don't have to worry about creepy crawly things. I can do this inside where it's not too hot and it's not too humid and there are no mosquitoes. I had been given a small plant as a present for the birth of my third daughter, and I didn't know what the plant was, but it had been sitting on our floor in a pot for about 12 years and had done really poorly. And I have written about the story of trying to rescue this plant, which I did with the help of some gardening experts. It turned out to be a spathiphyllum or a peace lily, which is probably the easiest indoor plant, most satisfying to grow because it has a wonderful white spathe, like a flower. I did rescue it, and it was off to the races.
Fantastic. Now, for those of you listening to me, Ruth and I are going to chat for gardening about 20 minutes. I'll take all the notes for you. Don't try to leave your cars and take notes with your thumbs. You can visit Ruth on the web. If you're on Twitter, all you social media people, you can follow her at RKASSINGER. Make sure you check out Ruth's home site, her blog and resource website at www.ruthkassinger.com. That's RUTHKASSINGER. And a brand new site, we're going to get to this for sure, it's www.gardenofmarvels.com. You made me smile, Ruth, when you were telling that story about the peace lily. I've literally just returned from Niagara Falls. Now, this will be a little time capsule, but on the weekend, it was frozen solid. It was 25 below with the wind chill, and Niagara Falls was frozen solid, and people came from all over the world to see the frozen falls, including me and my wife. And we came home yesterday, and I have a little indoor vegetable garden, and we have 9 red tomatoes in the middle of February. So it was like a little,
wow.
I know, so welcoming. I'm supposed to remind you to tell the kumquat story.
Well, among what I discovered over time was that I really liked growing in our conservatory citrus trees, and there just is nothing for someone who doesn't live in a semi-tropical climate, nothing like seeing citrus trees bloom and produce their fruit in the middle of winter. It's a delight. One of the trees that I have 2 kumquat trees, and they're about as tall as I am, so a little bit over 5 feet. And I had cherished these trees, but I was having some difficulty after about 9 years of growing them. One spring, they dropped all of their leaves, or almost all. Only the leaves at the very tips were still green. So it looked like this tree was holding up bare arms, wearing green gloves on the end. And I knew, by this time, I knew some basics of gardening, indoor gardening, but I didn't know what to do about this phenomenon. And I took a page out of my husband's book. I had seen him prune crepe myrtles and knock out roses outdoors, and I had seen what he did, which was to cut back those plants very hard. And I thought, well, okay, I think I'll solve this problem by giving my kumquat tree a good pruning. Then she will, I thought of her as a she, then she'll put out new branches and new leaves and be full and beautiful again. So I went ahead and did that. And the problem was she turned completely brown and brittle. I had killed my beloved kumquat tree. This inspired me. This was the inspiration for my second book on gardening, A Garden of Marvels, that came out earlier this year. What I wanted to know is what happened physiologically. Why in terms of biology, does pruning work for one kind of plant, but obviously not every kind of plant? And so I undertook another journey, and this one was to really educate myself in more than a scientific way about what makes plants work. And I thought long and hard about how to do this. I don't have a serious science background. So I had gone to the library and I had tried to read a freshman college textbook and found it was more than I could handle. And I thought, what I like are stories. And A Garden of Marvels is filled with stories about people and plants. And what I wanted to find out was whether I could go on a bit of a historical journey and go back to the early days of botany, back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, when people first began to understand the way plants work. Because I thought, I'll learn the basics along with the men and women who learned the basics of plant physiology themselves. And I discovered that there's a wonderful untold history full of interesting people that was quite helpful to me as a gardener in terms of understanding the basics. Like, how does water move up from the roots to the top of an oak tree? What is it? What force is it? How does it work that plants can imbibe water that way? What is it about petals? Why the colors, and why can you even find flowers often that have plants that have different colored flowers on them? Just a host of questions about the way plants work. So I wrote about these interesting people and visited experts around the country, including, for example, a man who grew the world's largest pumpkin a couple of years ago, to discover, what does it take physiologically to grow a 2,000-pound pumpkin.
Wow. I love it. We have a lot of listeners, Ruth, who dream about one day writing a book. A lot of them are gardeners, obviously. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about your process? Are you a morning writer, a nighttime writer? And how come you don't quit when you get frustrated writing a book?
Well, I am an around-the-clock writer. I'm fortunate enough that I have an attic office, and morning is my best time, but I'm not someone who can sit down and write, or just simply sit down for hours at a time. So I pop up and down during the day. I write for a little while. I research for a little while. Then I run downstairs and water a plant or run an errand, and then I'm back upstairs working again, talking to people, arranging travel, because for example, I just got back from Korea, where I was for my next book. But I will work from morning till night that way. Probably put in 8 hours, but it's definitely not straight.
Got it. Now, for those of you listening, there's a number of different ways you can get Ruth's books. You can go to gardenofmarvels.com for the new book, ruthkassinger.com for all the books. And then, of course, you're on Amazon, right?
Oh, yes. And you can find my books at any bookstore.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What I love about Amazon is it's so easy to give them as gifts, especially if somebody has a Kindle.
Yes. Yes, and I should tell you that last week, a Garden of Marvels made the New York Times bestseller list for science books.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you very much.
You're in distinguished company. Now, I have to hold your feet to the fire. All the listeners want to know the gardening side of things is, you started with a peace lily. Can you walk us through your garden today? What brings you joy, and is anything frustrating you?
Well, I think the plant that I would most recommend and that gives me the most pleasure because it's easy and it's beautiful and it's quite unusual, at least in northern climates, is a coffee tree. I started off with a 6-inch coffee tree. I think I bought it from Logee's. That's an online store headquartered in Danielson, Connecticut, Logees, and nurtured that coffee plant. Today it's about 6 feet tall. It's great because the coffee is shade grown, so you don't need direct sunlight. You can put it in the northern, eastern, or even western facing window. And throughout the year, it will produce pretty little white blossoms and then coffee cherries. And the cherries are bright red, and inside them are 2 coffee beans. And you can even pick them and roast them in your oven and make yourself your own cup of coffee. So that plant is high on my list.
Ah, I like it.
Now, in terms of frustrations, to go back to the citrus trees, there are two citrus trees varieties that are easy and I feel like everybody can do. That's the Calamandan orange and a Meyer lemon. And the kumquat trees are easy as well. But there are a lot of more exotic citrus trees that I've been unable to resist trying that are a frustration. Don't really have enough light, but more than that, they're susceptible to mealybugs and spider mites. And I must say that my gardening, as a gardener, the biggest frustration for me is always the inevitable pests. But, horticultural oil, a safe soap. I've even tried beneficial bugs. A combination works, but it is a lot of effort.
Oh, very good. Meyer lemon, I wrote that down because I have some Meyer lemon oil that we use in cooking. And my mother-in-law has the unique ability to, steal a leaf off anything and grow it. She's just got that skill set. You familiar with something called a loquat?
Yes, it's a combination, isn't it, of a kumquat and something else? Lime, perhaps?
Yeah, it's just an oddity that my mother-in-law is growing, and being in Canada, it's obviously an indoor plant. It's like a roommate for the house, but we have a key lime growing.
Yes, I once had a key lime, and those were wonderful too, and so nice for gin and tonics.
Exactly. There's a lot of practical applications. I understand, though. I mean, we take it outside. We lost a grapefruit tree that we had grown for 7 or 8 years to spiders, or whatever the bug was. It just killed it. So they must be awfully tasty to the bugs.
Yes, it's easier if you don't grow these plants too big. I find that taking them into the shower and giving them a shower once a week without soap, but just really hosing them down goes a long way to keeping them bug-free. But I have to say some of mine have gotten too large for that. But these tropical plants in the winter, I find they really do help my spirits.
Nice. You know, Ruth, I just glanced at the clock and our time is flying by. And now is the time in the show where we play a game called 5 Quick Questions. This is your chance to share your wisdom and experience with novice beginner gardeners. Are you ready to play?
I guess so.
Question number 1. What's the funniest or most embarrassing mistake you've made in your garden that you're willing to admit to in public?
Oh, these are hard questions. I guess I would say using the wrong fertilizer on a plant, not paying attention, using a bud and bloom fertilizer on a cactus, and realizing, after many months that I had completely blown it.
I'm very guilty of that, both with like steroids and water. Like more is better. It's just
right.
I've drowned my wife just, what are you doing? I
know, and we forget that roots are oxygen breathers, and so if we put a lot of water into them, they are definitely going to die because they're just like we are. The leaves are happy to exude oxygen, but the roots need oxygen.
Good stuff. Question 2. If you were only allowed to grow one plant, they just passed a rule and said, Ruth, you can only grow one plant this year. What plant on a personal note would you just have to grow?
Well, I'm afraid I have to say a kumquat tree.
Nice.
They're just they're the right size, they're durable, and they're so beautiful. And, of course, you can eat the fruit right off the tree.
I love it. Question 3 is about websites. I want everyone listening to head over to Ruth's website at ruthkassinger.com. You can visit her new book site at gardenofmarvels.com. Do you have one or two favorite internet websites for gardening that you use like a resource that you could recommend?
I go to Dave's Garden a lot. I think that's a wonderful resource. Both so many users who are great about answering questions, and they just have a lot of information. I also go to the Logi's website for indoor and tropical plants because they too have excellent descriptions of plants and tell you how to nurture them and what their requirements are. So you're less likely to make a mistake of thinking, oh, it's so beautiful, I must have it, when you realize that, no, you don't have quite that sunny a windowsill.
Excellent. Listeners, I'll have a link up to both Dave's Garden and Logi's. I have a link for you, Ruth, if you're into exotics. My friend John, and especially for listeners overseas, he runs a website called Tropical Britain. And he's from New Zealand, right? So you can imagine the climate over there. And he imports things that'll sort of grow into the UK, and of course lots of exotics that grow. They're big into zone pushing over there. I guess for you, though, you're an indoor gardener. You can push whatever zone you want.
That's right. I can do the full range. But I'm sure that there's a lot of valuable information at that site. I will definitely look that up.
I just love seeing plants and you go, what is that? Those are the things that your neighbor will never grow, and they, it creates curiosity. Speaking of number 4, being an author, do you have any favorite gardening books that you can recommend?
Well, the first thing that popped into my mind, because because I'm also interested in the history of gardening, is a book that's out of print but is fun to get and look into. It's called Once Upon a Windowsill, and has a lot of great stories itself about plant hunting and how some of the tropical plants came to be in our country, in countries outside of their native lands.
Let's slide in a little sneak peek at Garden of Marvels. When you were doing the research for your book, what's a little wow moment that you had? Or a nugget that you can't believe really happened, especially with regard to the old botanists?
There was a wonderful story, the story of the discovery that plants have sex is a great one. All throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, people associated plants and flowers especially, with the Virgin Mary. And so no one could conceive that flowers would have anything to do with sex when, of course, that's the sole reason for their being. And there was a great story about a gardener at the King's Garden in Paris who, in 1717, he was not the chief gardener. In fact, he was looked down upon because he was not of the upper classes. And he understood that flowers are all about sex. And one day when his superior was out of town, he gave a lecture which he advertised beforehand about sex and flowers. And it was that lecture on June 10th, 1717, that really shattered old ideas and led quite directly to Linnaeus coming up with his whole system of classification of flowers by the numbers of stamens and pistils in the flowers. In other words, it was a sexual classification. And I tell the story of this gardener, Sebastian Vaillant, in my book. He created quite a stir.
Excellent. Let's slide in question number 5. You ready, Ruth?
Yes, I am.
Is there anything you've never grown that you would love to experiment with?
I'd love to have an avocado tree.
Ooh.
I love avocados, and I've seen them in the South and have always wanted to have my own. I like the idea of picking my own avocado for dinner.
I've asked this question on 100 podcasts, and that's the first avocado. That's awesome. Very good, very good.
I guess the way to my heart is through my stomach.
I understand. Listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Make sure you head over to Ruth's website at www.ruthkassinger.com. Remember, there's 2 S's. You can follow Ruth on Twitter. Check out her new book at www.gardenofmarvels.com. Plus on Amazon, plus in all the bookstores. Especially if you have a friend into science and botany. Wow, what a gift. Ruth, you've been an amazing guest. Lots of good content.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's really been a pleasure.
We have listeners now in 62 countries around the world, which I can't even conceive. It's amazing. Thank you all for listening. Ruth, I want to invite you to have the last word to the listeners today. Can you leave us with either a note of encouragement or a pearl of wisdom?
Well, here's the note of encouragement that as gardening averse as I was, as brown-thumbed as I am, understanding a little bit about the science behind plants. It doesn't take much, but a little science, understanding of science goes a long way to making a successful gardener.
Outstanding. Ruth, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.